afternoon. I would like to call to order the regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for November 17th, 2021. May I have the roll call, please?
Chair McGill.
Here.
Vice Chair Clark.
Here.
Commissioner Fick.
Present.
Commissioner Lesnar Buxton.
Here.
Commissioner Longstreet.
Here.
That's it. Okay. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
Chair McGill, we have no changes.
Great. Thanks, Ms. LeBlanc. How about any written communications?
Chair McGill, we also have no written communications.
Okay, thank you. And now we're on to the public written community. Yeah, wait, no, I'm past that. Public comment. So this is public comment for those items that are not agenda items. Thank you. So any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time for public comments will be 15 minutes. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak, Ms. Navarez?
Let me read our notice. For those who wish to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand functionality in the GoToWebinar control panel. We are currently displaying a graphic showing where that is located. When I call on you, please unmute yourself and then you will have a maximum of 2 minutes to speak. For those who wish to speak on an agenda item later in the meeting, please raise your hand when the item is under discussion. And there are no hands raised.
Okay, great, thanks. And that brings us to the Youth Council report. We do not have a Youth Council report this month. And Ms. Navarez, I believe you've mentioned that they're going to go to every other month now?
That is correct, Chair McGill. They will report again in December.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Which brings me to the committee assignment reports. I'm gonna go from my right to the left, which means I will start with Commissioner Feck.
Sure. So Creeks Commission canceled the meeting for this month.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Commissioner Lesnar Buxton.
I was able to attend Youth Council this month. They talked about being in the Memphis Holiday Parade, also beginning to plan a speak out in March and also planning a PSA with miles against drug driving, educating people on the dangers of drug driving.
Great, thanks. Well, that's certainly with recent events and probably regular events, I think a good activity for them to take on. So thank you. Commissioner Longstreet.
I attended the De La Guerra Plaza revitalization meeting, and the traffic study, the updated traffic study was presented and accepted. And the plan was unanimously sent on to the Historic Landmarks Commission. We fully understand there will be tweaking of this project at Historic Landmarks. So it was time to send it on to meet its fate. So we will be following it through that process. Committee members will be attending the meeting. And let's all keep our fingers crossed that we keep this project rolling forward.
Okay, great, thanks. And then we have a member, we need to add a member, and that comes up later in on this agenda. Thanks. Vice Chair Clark.
We did not have a Park Foundation meeting. I did virtually attend the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting. We'll be discussing all the trees slated for removal later in the agenda. We didn't have an integrated pest management meeting, but we do have one coming up on November 30th.
Right. And for myself, as Vice Chair Clark said, the Park Foundation meeting was canceled for this month. I did attend the De La Guerra Plaza meeting as an observer and a member of the public. And so I think that takes this out. Which brings us to commission and staff communications. Do we have any items? I'm not aware of any. Okay. And then next on the agenda is ceremonial items. Do we have anything to celebrate?
Chair McGill, no, there are no ceremonial items.
Okay, great. Well, great or not. I'm sure there will be some next month. And then we have consent items. We have the approval of the minutes for the last regular meeting, which was October 27th. We have a recommendation that we waive the reading and approve the minutes. Do we have a motion to do so?
I move.
Great, thank you. Second? Okay, thank you. So Lesnar Buxton with the second by Longstreet. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Sorry, jumping the gun. Opposed? Okay, so moved. And that brings us to, I believe, the street tree advisory items. So Mr. Slack, over to you.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners. Next slide, please. The first Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove a total of 41 trees located at 1298 Las Positas Road, also known as Elings Park. The applicant's requesting the removal of 39 pepper trees, 1 Mexican fan palm, and also 1 Mediterranean fan palm. The applicant's requesting the removal of these trees along the entrance to Elings Park in an attempt to restore the park to a more native landscape palette. On the application, they also noted that they're planning on planting 49 new trees. That'll be a mix of both Quercus agrifolia, coast live oak, which is the native oak to this region, and also island oak, which is Quercus tomentella, which is endemic out to the islands. And so again, that was 49 proposed replacements of various sizes up to pretty large block sizes, I think up to 72-inch blocks, so pretty large trees proposed for replacement. The committee reviewed the application, discussed the trees, noted that the trees proposed for removal were in pretty good health and had been well maintained. There was some discussion about the possibility of retention of some of the pepper trees along the entrance, and after discussion, there was general consensus amongst the committee members that the proposed replacements in the various sizes were suitable mitigation for the current trees that were proposed for removal. And after review, made a recommendation to approve the project as proposed.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Longstreet. Oh,
Well, I did have a question, and it's along the lines of the retention of some trees. Was there any talk to phasing this in? There's a lot of room on the site for planting those oaks. Is it possible to not maintain those peppers forever, but to keep some of them for, let's say, 3 years till the other trees are established and starting to show some decent growth?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Longstreet, there was pretty good discussion between the applicant, specifically the applicant's landscape architect, and the committee in regards to those questions. I think when you look at what's being proposed, they're trying to utilize essentially the same real estate where the pepper trees are to frame the driveway and line it I can't really speak to, I think it's probably certainly possible in some situations, and then in others it's not, just because they're proposing to install these really large box trees. So I think there's certainly the possibility. We didn't really get into the sort of the weeds or drill down into that possibility of retention in great detail. I think after, you know, the discussion that was had, the committee felt or noted that they were pretty comfortable with the proposed replacements and didn't see a need to condition retention of some of the pepper trees.
Thank you. Commissioner Leslie Buxton, I believe you were jumping in as well.
We answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had the same question myself. It's laudable to want to replace with natives. I really think that's the right direction, but it's a pretty nice parkway the way it is now. So, you know, certainly think the discussion of phasing is a valid one. I think maybe this is a good time to see if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this before we go back to comments. So do we have anyone from the public?
Chair McGill, yes, we have 3 hands raised.
Okay.
The first is Mr. Bruce Giffen. Mr. Giffen, go ahead, and I'm unmuting you. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And you have 2 minutes. Mr. Giffen, you need to unmute yourself. Oh, hold on. Okay, no. Oh my goodness. It seems like Mr. Giffen might be having some difficulty. So let's go to Mr. Dean Noble. Mr. Noble, you will have 2 minutes to speak. Go ahead,
Right,
Mr. Noble.
Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. You have asked a terrific question. One of the reasons why we want to replace the Peruvian peppers is they are allelopathic trees. And the entire, I don't know if you've had a chance to see the entire rendering from Arcadia Design. I'm going to read this from our draft press release. Other native plants and scrubs will be planted along Jerry Harwin Parkway. Most of the species are already present in the park or endemic to the coastal sage scrub plant community. Several have been developed by nurseries from native species. They include elderberry, holly leaf cherry, laurel sumac, ceanthus, 4 species of ceanthus, brush sunflower, California buckwheat, John Darley, manzanita, Dr. Hurd manzanita, fuchsia flowering gooseberries, Catalina currant, Mexican brush sage, bonbon sage, point sal, purple spreader sage, and silver carpet beech aster. And we also have been gifted the mitigation from the multimodal path along Las Positas, which will be bringing in 141 seedlings, coastal oaks. They will be planted and maintained with 7 years of maintenance by Channel Islands Restoration. So there's a lot that's going to be going on Jerry Harwin Parkway, and we are calling it a reforestation in our press materials. And again, the Peruvian peppers are not native, they do spread, and they are allelopathic.
And for the sake of clarity, would you please define oleopathic?
Yes, the root word pathic, like pathetic, means to suffer. Allelo means the other. The other will suffer. So trees like eucalyptus or Peruvian peppers produce oils and actively inhibit the growth of other plants around them.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Okay, and so we have 2 more, and
Chair Clark, excuse me, pardon me, Chair McGill, Mr. Giffen is still having an issue. I'm hoping he will try calling in as well. We can try it again, Mr. Giffen. If we can try it, I will unmute you. And now try unmuting yourself again. Okay, he's gonna try the phone call. So there was another hand. Oh, here we go.
How about now? Great. Thank you all. I've been on the Aliens Park Board for 22 years. My guess is that those pepper trees are about 25 years old because they were pretty small when they were planted. And my first impression was, why did we plant those? And why did we plant them like soldiers on a regular basis in a park? The big thing about the park, as you know, is when you arrive there, is that for a long time, it's not felt like a park. It's felt like an abandoned subdivision. We're fortunate that we have an anonymous donor who stepped up and said, let's have the park entry be park-like. Let's reforest it. Let's do it with native plants. Let's use reclaimed water that we already received from the city's reclaimed water pipeline to do so. And so that's the intent here is, and that's why we're planning on bringing in large oak trees. Some of us are old enough that we're not buying green bananas these days. And there's that old expression about when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Well, that's today. So that's our goal, is to change the park entrance, the feel of the park when you arrive, and to let people know that when they get there, that they've truly arrived at a park and not an abandoned landfill in the subdivision. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. And you said there were 3 hands, yes?
There were originally, Mr. Bob Cunningham had his hand raised, but he no longer does. I sent him a chat message, but I haven't gotten a response. Mr. Cunningham, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand again. Okay, you will have 2 minutes to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm simply here to respond to questions. I don't really have anything to add beyond what Mr. Noble or Mr. Giffen has already said. So if there are questions, I'm here to answer them, I hope. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cunningham. So I guess I just have one 72-inch box. It's about the largest I have heard discussed in this forum. Can you give me a sense, I think Mr. Slack, how big a tree that is and how long it would take before it starts to resemble the maturity of what we're seeing on the parkway now?
Chair McGill and commissioners, I would probably suggest that Mr. Cunningham answer the question. I do know that they've secured a lot of these trees as field grown trees. So they're going to, these are trees that have been grown in Ojai, in natural soil, and they're planning on digging them out. So I think that Mr. Cunningham could probably speak to a greater degree in terms of what size tree you're looking at specifically for this project.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Cunningham?
I'm sorry. I'm having, oh, here we go. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The 72-inch box trees will be about 12 to 15 feet tall with a spread of maybe 10 to 12 feet when they're installed. We also are planting 60-inch boxes and 48-inch boxes and 36-inch boxes. The 72s I think are going to be pretty substantial. I believe we have more than half a dozen of them. I don't have the list in front of me. And they'll be scattered throughout more or less randomly on both sides, but primarily the south side of the parkway. In fact, the oaks grow a little bit faster than the pepper trees. We will see a little over a foot a year in overall spread and height. Obviously there will be a noticeable difference, but we're planting more oaks than the number of peppers that we're removing. And we're also doing additional ground cover and shrub plantings all the way along in the same project. So I think my sense is that the perception will be, this is a nice new project and the park is, taking steps in the right direction toward restoring a genuinely native landscape. Bruce Giffen had told me a while back that the original designer of the park, George Gervin, had in mind that there would be primarily a native landscape and that he was interested in introducing the island oak, which is, one very nice thing about that, because the island oak is not endemic to the coast. It's endemic to the islands, but it's a beautiful tree. There are some nice specimens of it at the Botanic Garden, and I think it's going to add some very nice variety. And I've really digressed. I'm sorry about that.
No, thank you very much. No, thank you for a thorough answer. Are there any other questions or any discussion?
I just, I don't have any more questions if we're moving on from that. I am the last person that ever wants to see a mature tree grow as you go from our urban forest, as you guys know, but this one is not as tough for me as I thought it was going to be. I think the replacement, we're going to have a net gain of trees. There's going to be a net increase in biomass. And what Elings Park is trying to do here is they're trying to make this park a welcoming place. In the last 2 years, they've been making a mass exodus to parks and from outside to do gathering places. And if you've been around Elings Park in the last year and a half, you've seen all the dogs, all the people riding their bikes, all the people gathering. This is where our future is. It's in parks. And I think to reforest it and make that, if you have to make the front entrance, take those trees out, put in oak trees to, even if it's just to satisfy a donor, the resulting effect is going to make this someplace people want to go, and we want people outside. I don't know. I'm not having a problem with this one, which is odd for me.
Yeah.
I think I don't see a long-term loss here. I see a long-term gain. I do think it's interesting though that these are street trees on a private street that's also a city street. Is that correct, Mr. Slack? These are street trees on a private street?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, the city owns the land that Elings Park is on. So by default, we consider them, street trees based on the way the municipal code is written. Similar to you may recall, we looked at the municipal tennis project where they were doing some improvements there as well. Very similar situation where the city actually is in ownership of the property, and as a result, the trees fall under the 15.20 of the municipal code.
Thanks. I'd wondered about that too. Any other comments? So I came to this 10 minutes ago before the conversation thinking I was pretty much going to recommend that we have some kind of phased conditionality because of the maturity of the parkway. And it seemed ripping out a bunch of mature trees and putting in I really was interested in the phasing, but I am swayed by the conversation that I've heard. I'm particularly compelled by the vision of it not just being the trees, but the overall biodiversity of what the plantings that are envisioned. I mean, it really does sound like a who's who of the Botanic Garden with a vision. So yeah, I'm based on what I've heard, and based on the size of the trees that are going to be put in, I am now prepared to fully support this. And I'm in Elings 2 or 3 times a week, so this will have a direct impact on my life.
I can support this. I would request that nothing be removed until they're ready to replant, that we not see those trees come down until the project is completely ready to move forward.
Yeah.
No other discussion. I would be prepared to make a motion to approve the removal of the 39 pepper trees, 1 Mexican fan palm and 1 Mediterranean fan palm at 1298 Las Positas, with the condition that the proposed replantings be completed in line with the proposal we got in our packet. How do I word that? As long as the landscape plan is followed as presented.
Okay.
And given that the trees not be removed until Elings is ready to go forward with the reforestation.
I believe I heard a second from Commissioner Longstreet. You're not, you need to get a little closer to your mic, I think, somehow.
I second it.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Great.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove 22 various trees located at 121 East Mason Street. The applicant's requesting the removal of these trees due to comprehensive improvements essentially on the full city block. So the trees are here along Mason, along Santa Barbara Street, also on Yananali and then Gray. So that entire large rectangular block of property is being completely redeveloped and repurposed. The the photograph here where a large percentage of the trees being proposed for removal this is being completely repurposed as part of that project. And then as you move along Santa Barbara Street, and then there's a couple trees also on Yananali proposed for removal. And the reason why those trees are being proposed for removal is due to sidewalk widening requirements. The existing sidewalk has to be widened, I believe, by 18 inches. That additional widening of the sidewalk, it basically encroaches into the shade tree or all the street trees root flare. And as a result of that requirement, necessitates removal. There are some palm trees that are along Santa Barbara Street, and during evaluation, it was determined that they could tolerate the amount of root pruning, given that they have a completely different root system and are much more tolerant of that. And the sidewalk's not going to encroach into the root flare. So all of the palm trees along Santa Barbara Street are actually being proposed for retention. And then in addition to that, all of the Mexican fan palms that you see in this photograph here also are being relocated on site. So as previous reviews, when something's relocated, we consider it a removal. So those also are part of the 22. And so the committee reviewed the application. We actually had a site visit for this project, which was extremely helpful to take a kind of an intimate look at each of the trees. Everything to the committee made good practical sense in terms of the widening of the sidewalk and the impact to the shade trees along Santa Barbara Street, and then also the two evergreen pears at the corner of Yananali and Santa Barbara Street. One thing that the committee did discuss is during evaluation of the plans, there was a proposal to relocate 5 of these large Mexican fan palms onto the project, and there were 2 that essentially didn't have a home. And the committee made several comments that it made good sense to try to keep those trees somewhere within the project vicinity. The landscape architect was pretty amenable to that strategy, and that became part of a condition that we'll review here in a second. And in addition to the proposed removals, there's the new project will be planting 38 new street trees all around. And we'll be looking at that at the committee and commission level in the future, because it will require some redesignation of the existing street tree species as a result of this project. So in summary, the committee reviewed the application, the trees on site, noted that the proposed removals made good practical sense, and that the proposed replacements and the numbers also made good practical sense. And I neglected to mention that there was one setback tree as part of this project. There was a lemon bottle brush that was kind of tucked back behind the sidewalk on a residential property. So of those 22 trees, one is a setback tree. So we'll identify a finding if that removal is supported as well. So after review, the committee made the determination to support the project as proposed with the 22 tree removals, and that includes the one setback lemon bottle brush, and with the condition that the 2 additional Mexican fan palms be relocated across the street into the public right-of-way on Mason. And so if you were able to make it out to the site and you were looking at this group of trees, if you turned around and looked at the train tracks, there were a couple other palm trees that were along the right-of-way there. So the condition is that those 2 additional palm trees be relocated on the other side of the street into that right-of-way that is city right-of-way there. And during the review, they made the determination the commission could make the finding that a reasonable and practical development of the property on which the trees are located requires their removal.
Okay, great, thanks. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Longstreet.
Where is this project in permitting? Is it going through plan? What other commissions does it come forward to? Do you know?
Chair
And where is
McGill,
it?
Commissioner Longstreet, I'm not 100% certain. They're currently going through I believe it's the Development Advisory Review Team process, and they've not received full project design approval, I think. I want to say PDA, I get the acronyms with planning confused all the time. But so this is good. This will be seen by ABR. It's been to ABR in concept, I think, a couple times already. So they're kind of navigating through this process. We actually looked at this project at the committee level a few months back, and due to the complexities, we kind of postponed it for a couple months so we could set up a site visit to go out and look at the individual trees and the intricacies involved in the project. So they don't have full project design approval yet, but they're currently navigating through that process.
So anything we do would be, those removals are dependent on design approval. Full approval.
Chair McGill and Commissioner Longstreet, that's correct.
Thank you. And thank you for the red tape around all of the trees. It made it so much easier to visualize the project.
Yeah, it really did. It's a lot easier to see than the white little things stapled to the trees. Yeah. I had a question, and this is just, I'm absolutely sure that this question is just going to show my ignorance of Latin names. But in looking at the list, and I'm looking at Ms. Horn's letter actually, where she lists the removals. And my question is really around biodiversity. Some of these Latin names don't look like our usual suspects of trees that we look at for removal. And so my question is, are we removing some trees that are rarer or more unusual here and that we should be thinking about in terms of replacement? Or I'm just not understanding the names?
Chair McGill and commissioners, the Brachychiton discolor, or the Queensland lacebark, is somewhat rare, I think, to the area. We're pretty fortunate that we do have a lot of them. You know, we've looked at those trees on Gillespie before. They're on Garden. You know, I would say it's probably a rare species, but I think that it's safe to say that we also have them in an abundance as well, even though it's more a species that you can't necessarily buy at the nursery anymore, but we're pretty fortunate to have a pretty decent population of them. The ones that are on site, they're not particularly great specimens, so I don't really think that we're losing any real significant trees from what they're proposing.
Okay, thanks. And she talks about, of course, the Magnolia grandiflora. I guess at some point we'll need to do a street tree designation change with this, or can we just?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, that's correct. So for example, Gray Avenue, which doesn't have any proposed removals, but they're proposing to develop the parkway or the right of way, put sidewalk parkway in and plant new street trees. That's Canary Island pine currently. And it just does not work for a number of reasons. So we will be looking at this project in full scope and making some changes to the existing designations.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? If not, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak?
Chair McGill, I don't see any currently, but anyone who would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand in the GoToWebinar control panel. Oh, we have one speaker, Clara Bell. Ms. Bell, go ahead. You may unmute yourself. You'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, I just wanted to recommend to not have as many of the palm trees taken out because there are some orioles that nest in that area, and it would be a real shame to have that loss for those families of birds that visit every year. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slack. There we go. In terms of bird habitat, I guess most of these Mexican found palms are scheduled for relocation. Do you have a comment to make on that?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the palms, all 7 of these Mexican fan palms will remain on site. Given the proposed improvements in this specific location, it does require that they be relocated. So there's 5 that will be retained on site. And then as per the recommendation from the Street Tree Advisory Committee, the remaining 2 would be relocated to the other side of Mason Street there. Certainly, Mexican fan palms, palms in general, do provide pretty significant bird habitat. There's lots of other Mexican fan palms in the area. So I would hope that we wouldn't be causing any real significant disturbance with the relocation of these trees and retaining them all on site.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question about that. When people go to remove trees, do they do a quick survey to see if there's any currently any wildlife currently inhabiting the tree? Do you know? Do people do that?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, I think on a project of this scale that it would be a necessary step to make sure. Certainly when the city moves down the path of removal, and even just pruning, we're always evaluating those things. On private property, it's always a hope that everybody does that. You know, there's a level of control that just simply doesn't exist in terms of the latitude that homeowners have, you know, in the backyard and in some cases the front yard and things of that nature. But I think certainly the commission could also make the comment that the relocation of these palms should be the wildlife habitat potential should be taken into consideration, and perhaps the relocation could be done during non-nesting season, and a survey could be done to avoid, you know, any potential disturbance. I think that would be certainly prudent, and it would get memorialized as part of the planning review process.
Great.
Thanks. I mean, I know at some point we're going to be meeting and doing some workshop work on trees in general, but my recollection is the last time I looked into doing my own trees, there are actually some regulations in terms of certain times of the year that you are technically supposed to do a survey before you go up and do tree work.
Yeah, Chair McGill and Commissioners, yeah, just to provide some clarification, there is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I forget the year that went into effect. It was a long time ago. Nesting season is essentially, you know, March through September. It's the bulk of the entire calendar year. So any contractor working for the city as well as city staff, we're always doing pre-inspections, and technically all tree care companies should be doing, you know, pre-work inspections before they even are embarking upon like just simple tree pruning to make sure there's no active nesting going on.
I know we scheduled our work accordingly. Okay, if there is no further discussion, is there anyone prepared to make a motion? If not, I will. I will move that we conditionally approve the request to remove the 22 various trees, 121 East Mason Street and surrounds. On the condition, on the condition and the one setback tree, on the condition that the applicant relocate the 2 fan palms not addressed to the public right of way across the street on Mason Street, and that, you know, all appropriate permits are in place before any removals are done. And appropriate bird surveys are done before any removals and replacements are done. And I don't have my little sheet with me. I need to go get it. But for the setback tree, we can make the finding that it's a reasonable development. I don't have the exact language because I need to go get my sheet.
I think it's this reasonable development of property.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. That was Commissioner Feck, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, great, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Comment.
Oh,
I
sorry.
would make a comment. Our funk zone is sure losing its funk.
No kidding.
I hope they don't defunk so much that it's no longer a vibrant community down there.
Yeah, obviously that's not Parks and Rec, but I hear you. Yeah. We're gonna, we'll turn into yet another boutique street. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So moved. Okay. De La Guerra Plaza. I'll go get my sheet while you're changing slides.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is a request to remove a Mexican fan palm next to the building at 726 State Street. This is in the back of the property along De La Guerra Plaza. The tree is part of Stork Placida that you may know as a walkthrough from De La Guerra Plaza to State Street. The applicant was requesting removal of the tree due to its close proximity to the structure and concerns with damage to the structure. The committee reviewed the application, had discussion regarding the tree, noting that it's been in its location for a significant amount of time and quite old for a Mexican fan palm. And then there was a discussion regarding palm root development. So palm roots are somewhat unique. Palms in general are monocots, so they're actually more closely related to grasses than shade trees. And the root system is not capable of producing secondary growth. So when you see palm tree roots and they look kind of like this pin, you know, and they're about, you know, pinky size in diameter, they actually never get larger. And a lot of times it's that secondary growth within shade trees that creates the immense pressure that leads to, you know, lifting of hardscapes and cracking of foundations and that sort of thing. So there was a good bit of discussion regarding that, and then comments from the committee that it would have been nice if there had been more evidence shown in regards to the actual damage that the palm tree was creating. And after review, the committee made a recommendation to deny the request for the removal of the Mexican fan palm. 726 State Street.
Do we have any questions?
That was denied without prejudice, correct?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, thank you for clarifying that. That was a recommendation to deny without prejudice to allow for the applicant to return in the future if they so chose to provide some additional information regarding the damage. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks. No one on the commission has any questions? I do have one. And this is, unfortunately, if this was a memory test for me and I failed, but my memory is that not that long ago, I mean, some months ago now, we looked at something which struck me as quite similar in the greater downtown area where we approved a tree removal that was quite close, basically up adjacent to the house. And I tried to find it in the old minutes and couldn't. So if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I'm really, it's just a consistency check here on, are we approving something in one place and not in another that is basically the same?
Chair McGill and commissioners, I think the property that you're referencing is a small, very unique street called Curley Avenue.
That's it.
And so I think, we will relay the comments from the commission about the consistency because the situations were very similar. You are right. I think that in the case of the Curley Avenue palm versus this palm at 726 State Street, the key factor that differentiates them is the Curley Avenue was a setback tree, whereas this tree is technically a street tree because it's within Stork Placida, which is considered part of the park, I guess, or De La Guerra Plaza, at least in terms of our tree inventory. I went by Curley Avenue in advance of this meeting to try to jog my memory as well. There was some subtle cracking of the steps that led to the property, and the palm itself, the actual stem was closer to the structure, but I completely understand the comments. So I think that they were very similar situations, and really the big factor is this is a street tree versus a setback tree.
As I recall that particular one too, it was a very limited yard space with parking issues on the street, and it was their front yard, basically took up the entire area. So I think there were some differences in it being home versus a yard space.
Yeah, I remember that too, now that you mention it. Any other questions? Okay, if not, do we have anybody from the public that wishes to speak on this item?
Chair McGill, there are no hands raised.
Okay. Are there any items for discussion other than what we've already just been, well, including what we've just been talking about? Any items for discussion? I mean, I guess I would only comment that it's amazing how these trees work, but I absolutely saw no signs of any property damage. So, and it's amazing something that could be that close to a structure and show no signs of damage. And there were certainly no signs of hardscape damage around the tree either. And I went by twice because when I started thinking about that other one, I went back and looked again.
Make a motion. I would move that we concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee to deny the removal without prejudice of the Mexican fan palm at 624 East De La Guerra Plaza and 726 State Street.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so moved. On to San Rafael.
Chair McGill and commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is a request to remove a street tree, a silver dollar gum, from the public right-of-way at 1308 San Rafael Avenue. The applicant listed just a general decline in vigor as the primary reason for removal. concern about failure as a result of the decline. The committee reviewed the application, discussed the tree. There was consensus amongst the committee members that the tree did show subtle signs of decline, but overall seemed structurally sound and didn't warrant removal at the present time. And after review, made a recommendation to deny the request for the removal of the silver dollar gum located at 1308 San Rafael Avenue.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Okay, well, I'll, as always, I guess my question would be, the subtle signs of decline. I mean, what does that mean in terms of the overall longevity of the tree and what happens when it goes into more rapid decline? And really where I'm going with this question is, at what point does it make more sense to replace and let something younger and more vigorous grow rather than keep something that's declining? When do you tip over on that scale?
Chair McGill and commissioners, that's a great question. I think each individual situation is unique, so that we're going to evaluate each tree independently and make that determination. I think anytime you're looking at 25% or less, live foliage throughout the canopy, that's really a pretty good gauge or threshold when we really start thinking critically about removing the tree. In terms of the value that large old trees like this do provide, the longer that we can keep them around, the more work that they're doing environmentally, and also just the amount of carbon that's been sequestered throughout the tree's life. So it's very advantageous to try to retain them as long as we can. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. In this case, staff also looked at the tree. There were really no clear indicators as to why the decline would be occurring, but the root flare, everything seemed to be pretty structurally sound. If you look at the photograph and if you were on site, the parkway is dry gravel. It's clearly not being irrigated. The landscape is pretty well developed, and I don't think that the property owner is doing a lot of irrigating on the property as well. And unfortunately, we're staring down the barrel of another chronic drought situation, and one that is essentially an extension of the last 10 years. So it's very stressful, and then it could just be water deficit over several years that's led to this kind of decline. But I think just kind of getting back, and we're about anything 25% or less in terms of living foliage throughout the canopy, we're going to take a real critical look at the tree and make a determination at that point. We also have conversations with the homeowners too. They see the tree all the time. So we always kind of say, hey, we're kind of leaning on you to kind of keep us apprised, because sometimes they will rapidly decline. And in that case, then it may warrant faster response, in which case we would go out, inspect it, and if it warranted it, we would, get it on the books for removal.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that good response. Any other questions? Okay, if not, do we have anybody from the public wishing to speak?
Chair McGill, no, there are no hands raised.
Okay, any discussion?
No, the street tree advisory committee meeting, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about this, because there wasn't a whole lot to discuss. They went out, the tree looked okay, and looked okay. It didn't look like it warranted removal. It was just, it's not the picture of health, but it's not on death's doorstep either. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's always good to get a sense of really where the conversation went.
Yeah, it wasn't huge discussion because there's not a whole lot to discuss. The tree just looks like a tree in Santa Barbara right now.
Yep. Is anybody ready to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to agree with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendations to deny the removal of the silver dollar gum at 1308 San Rafael.
Okay. I'll second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. And on to North Soledad.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove a black acacia located within the front setback of the property at 419 North Soledad. The applicant was requesting removal of the black acacia due to some noted decline throughout the canopy of the tree, as well as disruption to the hardscape surrounding the tree. The tree's done a remarkable job of growing in this very funky space. The property actually has a staircase that you can't see in the photograph that goes down to a lower level. And then there's a patio immediately left of the tree, and the tree's grown in this extremely small space. And so the applicant's concerned about the decline and some of the hardscape disruptions and wishes to remove the tree. The committee did review the request. They noted the tree was in fair shape, but that it did show subtle signs of decline. Black acacia is a tree that, once declining, does warrant sort of a critical, sort of constant eye because it decays very rapidly and is one of those species of trees that can become problematic very quickly once it starts to sort of go downhill with age and decline. The applicant did express an interest in replacing the tree on the application, and after review, the committee made the recommendation to support the removal of the black acacia on the condition that the applicant plant a new tree on the property that can achieve a mature height of 25 to 30 feet at maturity. And they made the determination the commission could make the findings that the principles of good forest management will be best served by the proposed removal.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? This is the kind of a tree that somebody should write a play or a song about. I mean, it just kind of emerges from nowhere. It did it. Okay, if no one has any questions, do we have any comments from the public?
Chair McGill, there are no hands raised.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, anybody like to make?
I would move that we concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee for the removal of the black acacia at 419 North Soledad Street, on the condition it be replaced by a tree that can achieve 25 to 30 feet at maturity. And this supports the good forest management.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Feck. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So moved. Okay.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove a Canary Island pine located within the front setback of the property at 405 Cannon Drive. The applicant listed several reasons for removal: disruption to hardscape, noting subtle lift in the driveway, concerns with the foundation of the home, and then debris accumulation, as well as just fire concerns with the needles and the close proximity of the tree to the structure, and just a general concern for safety, again, with the tree being very close to the property. The committee reviewed the application, discussed the tree, noted it was a pretty amazing example of a Canary Island pine, had been very well taken care of, did express that there was the possibility that there was concern, I suppose, or at least noted concern that the tree was really close to the home, and there's the possibility that it may be causing some damage, at least to the home's foundation, but that there was no really significant evidence to suggest that provided by the applicant. The applicant was present. There was really good discussion back and forth between the applicant and the committee. The applicant even expressed an interest in possibly retaining the tree. They were just sort of exploring options and seeing, just kind of moving through the process and seeing what options were available to them. After review, the committee came to the conclusion that the tree was of significant value to the property as well as the entire neighborhood, and made a recommendation to deny the removal of the Canary Island pine at 405 Cannon Drive without prejudice, similar to the past denial without prejudice, to allow the applicant to potentially further explore around the tree and find out if there was any real impact to the home's foundation from the tree being that close to the structure.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I just one quick one. Is this a tree that if there was some hardscape or foundation damage would be hurt unduly if there was root pruning or treatment?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, I think it's similar to the, when do you remove the tree question? Every situation is going to be specific. And I would say Canary Island pine lends itself to some level of root pruning. So I think the question would be is how much root system is going to be impacted by the prescribed root pruning if it was necessary. So I think it's too difficult to say without knowing the full prescribed amount of root pruning, I guess. So it's somewhat, my answer is pretty ambiguous, but I think it always is going to be. We say the same thing with sidewalk root pruning. Until we see the roots, we can't make a really informed decision about whether it's going to be too much or it makes good sense to move forward with root pruning and retention.
Okay, thanks. If there are no other questions, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak?
Chair McGill, no hands are raised.
Okay. Any discussion? All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to agree with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation to deny the removal without prejudice of the Canary Island palm at 405 Cannon Drive.
I'll second it.
Okay, that was Longstreet.
I would also say that just the drive through San Roque, that particular neighborhood, and the trees that are in that neighborhood are spectacular. It is a beautiful, beautiful part of town.
Yeah, it's a really lovely neighborhood. And that tree is quite outstanding in its own right. Yeah. Okay, with that, if there's no further discussion, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved, and that brings us to Chino Road.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the last Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove a queen palm located within the front setback at 1204 Chino Street. The applicant listed both maintenance and safety concerns kind of hand in hand with the palm tree. The tenant for the applicant has small children, and they're concerned about fruit and fronds dropping and also just the general maintenance that the tree requires. It's worth noting, the committee brought it to my attention. Apparently the palm has been pruned since the photo was taken. So your site visit, it probably looked much more tidy than the photograph that's on display currently. The committee reviewed the application, noting that maintenance considerations with palm it's just like with a shade tree. It requires pruning. That the palm was in good health and it actually had just been recently maintained, so it was in really good shape overall and didn't satisfy any findings within the Municipal Code 15.24. And after review, made the recommendation to deny the removal of the queen palm in the front setback at 1204 Chino Street.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? No, I don't. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak?
Chair McGill, no hands are raised.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, if not, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee and deny the application to remove the Queen Palm on 1204 Chino Street. And there are no findings to support removal.
I'll second.
We'll all second it.
Okay, you got the last one, BB. We'll second with Vice Chair Clark.
Well, and we had Commissioner Fleck in there too.
Okay, we're all seconded.
I'll agree.
So we don't have to vote now. We all voted on it.
All right. Notice any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved, and that completes the Street Tree Advisory Committee items. Thank you very much, Mr. Slack. Which brings us to the, where are we? It brings us to the director's report. Good evening, Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you, Chair McGill. I have two items that I'd like to share with you. The first is to let you know that next Wednesday afternoon, November 24th, the Kiwanis Club and the city's Adapted Programs section will co-host the annual Adapted Programs Thanksgiving Luncheon. The luncheon will be held at the Oak Park main picnic area. The pandemic has kept us we weren't able to hold the event last year, so we're very pleased that we can bring it back this year. It's been a long-standing tradition in the department. So we anticipate that we will serve about 300 participants, and we'll be offering a complete Thanksgiving meal with turkey and pies and the whole thing. So this annual feast brings together individuals with disabilities, their families, and caregivers. And I'd also like to share some information on city office closures that we will have at the end of December for the holidays. So apart from essential services, most city offices will be closed from Friday, December 24th through Friday, December 31st, with normal operations resuming on Monday, January 3rd. So for Parks and Recreation, the most of our staff will be off and offices will be closed, but we will still maintain Parks Division services so that we can provide basic park maintenance services and cover any emergencies. On December 25th and January 1st, we will be doing restroom cleaning and litter removal only with a very small crew. And that completes the director's report, unless you have any questions for me.
I do not. I really think it's great to see things like the Thanksgiving luncheon come back. I mean, that's just, a vital part of the community, and it's just nice to start to see everybody get back out and share like that.
What are vaccination requirements for that event? Are there any?
I don't believe that there are any. And since it's an outdoor event, it's also not going to be masks. Masks are not going to be required, but we are going to be serving the food. So it's not kind of a buffet style. That's one of the strategies to reduce risk.
I did just get an email today saying that as a member of a board or commission that I have to make a declaration of my vaccine status, and if I am vaccinated, to show proof of that. So I'm imagining all of the volunteers, or at least city ones at the event, will have met the same requirements.
I believe that the deadline to complete that is December 1st, though. Is that correct? So probably a lot of people will have already done it, but because of the timing, it's not mandated at that point.
No thanks. But I'm glad that we're looking at things like that now.
Yeah, I was not unhappy to get that email. Yeah. Okay. I believe that that's the director's report. That brings us to old business, and I do not see any old business. So then on to new business, and we're back to trees, and it's a review of the street tree master plan. And I assume we're seeing Mr. Slack again. Welcome back.
Thank you. We can go ahead and cue up this slide presentation, please. Chair McGill and commissioners, we're back. Just wanted to take the opportunity to provide like a brief report on the street tree designation list. It's been around for a long time. It's a very useful tool, kind of one of the unsung heroes of the forestry program. So we'll kind of look at the background, where it came from, some of the evolution, and then sort of next steps as we move forward, utilizing this super valuable planning tool. We can go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. So what is the designation listing? Quite simply put, it's a gigantic spreadsheet full of streets, names, and tree species. It's been in existence since 1977 and was an appendix to the approved street tree master plan back in 1977. Next slide, please. So what it does do from a planning perspective is it designates a species or multiple species for planting on a city street, or in some cases, a block or multiple blocks. So why does it make sense to do that? There's several reasons. I think we look at optimization of planting location. We can match the right tree to the right site. You know, the classic sort of catchphrase is right tree in right place. You know, we try to think long-term about the mature development of the tree, try to match it to the available, you know, width of the parkway and the available rooting volume present, so we can not only minimize disturbances and potential problems down the road, but also maximize the potential of the tree and the tree canopy that's produced. Standardization of maintenance is also a really valuable benefit. The classic example for us is that imagine a street of like beautiful jacarandas, and then sprinkled in there are 6 or 8 Mexican fan palms. The jacarandas need pruned, you know, about once every maybe 5 to 7 years, depending on their age. And the Mexican fan palms, we all know you could prune them at least once a year, maybe even twice a year in a perfect world. So by choosing the right species and thinking about what makes sense, even if it's a mix of trees, it allows us to potentially reduce the need to be on the street so frequently and to standardize the maintenance. By defining species, we're also able to eliminate known problematic species. So, you know, instead of this sort of cornucopia approach, if we know something's problematic, we can define these species per street, and that helps to eliminate the planting of additional trees on the property. And we have a tool to go back and say, you know, you can't plant a ficus in your 2-foot parkway because we have this comprehensive approach to street tree planting, and this is what we plant on your street. And then lastly, I think one of the really great reasons why a designation list makes sense is just being able to think really critically about your entire street tree population and utilize that information to just increase diversity. So we can really kind of drill down, look at the number of species that we have throughout the entire city's urban forest, and continue to maximize the diversity within the street tree population. So currently the listing has 670 streets. There are some streets that still do not have a designation, and there's some right-of-ways that have not been improved, so that this will continue to evolve. And there's currently 151 unique species of trees in the designation listing. I think that's a pretty stellar number. I think if you look at a lot of other communities, they've really kind of narrowed down what they're using. And, you know, some agencies could argue there's some value in that, but that really kind of sets you up for a potentially unsustainable situation when you become too reliant on just a very narrow number of trees. And it also kind of limits your ability to kind of get creative on the street, which we'll talk about a little later. The Street Tree Master Plan, which hasn't seen any significant revisions since its initial adoption by Council in '77, is referenced in Municipal Code 15.20, which we often kind of call the Street Tree Ordinance. So consistent with what we've done in the past and what we'll continue to do in the future, Commission approval is required in order to make changes to this document. Next slide, please. So in addition to this just guiding our planting decisions, it also helps us to realize some broader goals. Some of you are familiar with the Urban Forest Management Plan. And the Urban Forest Management Plan is a different document than the Street Tree Master Plan. It's a much more broad-based approach to forestry objectives for the city. And the designation listing has a lot of crossover in helping us to realize some of these objectives that are listed in the Urban Forest Management Plan. Next slide, please. So just to kind of do a little background on the management plan, I think, you know, I know Commissioner Longstreet was around during the review and development of the Urban Forest Management Plan. It was adopted by Council. Oh, there it is. Excellent. It was adopted in 2014 by City Council. As I noted, it's different than the Street Tree Master Plan. Street Tree Master Plans are usually sort of operational documents talking more about the nuts and bolts of the operation, pruning, removals, plantings, which is why the designation listing back in the day was kind of couched within that document, whereas the management plan sets really broad range goals, both short, you know, mid and long range goals, but much more broader in context. And then, you know, the Urban Forest Management Plan went through a really extensive community outreach. There were lots of workshops, and it was a very inclusive project for the community. Next slide. And so within the Urban Forest Management Plan, there's 15 key objectives listed, and we identified 4 objectives that are the designation listing helps us to realize. So the objective 1 is to maintain city trees to promote safety, health, and longevity. Good examples of that, which we kind of already touched on, are choosing, you know, the right tree for the right place. It also helps us to define species that make good practical sense, even from just a general safety perspective. You know, some species are just not great species for the public right away. You know, they are inherently somewhat challenging and problematic. This tool allows us to sort of filter these out from use in the public right away as we gain knowledge and experience with specific species of trees. And then when you look at the health and longevity component, we're matching, you know, the right tree to the right location so that we can minimize things like hardscape disruption, which leads to root pruning, which almost always leads to an accelerated demise of the tree and requires probably premature removal. So matching the tree to the site. Objective 2 is optimized tree canopy. Very similar to matching tree to site, we're trying to maximize the amount of canopy in these planting locations and on a given street so that we can maximize the work that the tree does, you know, through shading and sequestering carbon and other harmful pollutants, capturing stormwater, and then, you know, cooling our environment through transpiration as well. Optimizing age and enhancing species diversity. So the designation listing, again, it allows us to look at things on a very detailed level and get into critical analysis of what trees we are using and being able to monitor the diversity within the population. A pretty good example would be it's an old school like urban forestry rule. They call it the 30-20-10 rule. So you should never have more than 30% of your urban tree population should be a specific family of trees. 20% should not be a specific genus, and 10% should not be a specific species. And classic examples of that are like chestnut and American elm, where we've become way too reliant on the planting of a tree that's done exceptionally well in the urban environment, but we get way too reliant on it. Something comes in, a pathogen or a pest, and then we end up losing huge amounts of urban canopy as a result of that. So the designation listing allows us to always kind of be in constant analysis of what we're using. And then lastly, which all of this is, it's all encompassing, is maximizing the economic, environmental, and aesthetic benefits of the urban forest, which I think is pretty much at the root of what we're always trying to do. Again, making informed decisions about the species we plant. So, you know, I think it was just important to not only acknowledge what the document does, but how there's significant overlap in achieving some pretty broad range program objectives as well. Next slide, please. So why do reviews occur? It's worth noting that there still exists several designations from 1977, which is pretty remarkable. Some of them make good sense still to this day, and then some of them don't, like the 121 East Mason project that we talked about as a removal consideration. And we referenced the fact that Canary Island pine is specified for use on Gray Avenue, super close to the ocean. Pine is a species that is a genus that's just struggling in this area with the change in climate and the real significant changes in weather patterns. And so why do these changes occur? Redevelopment property is a good one, which again, we just referenced the 121 East Mason project. Increasing diversity is another key consideration when we look at why we may need to modify a designation. I think another good little note is, as we kind of move forward and we look at trying to optimize the amount of trees that are planted on a given street, there are opportunities where trees could be planted, and you know, there may be overhead utility line considerations, or maybe it's just a small space and you could probably put a tree in there. And if you diversify the designations for that street, it allows you to have a lot more flexibility to try to maximize the tree population on a given street or segment of the street. Poorly performing species over time, things change, there's climate change, chronic drought. These things have had a profound impact on our street tree population. And there's just trees that worked 30 years ago that just simply don't work now. And I think, you know, especially over the next few years, you'll see a shift, and we'll start seeing a lot more species introduced that we aren't really that used to seeing. And a lot of those trees are going to be, you know, the trees that thrive in these arid environments and can survive with really low water, available water. Emergence of pest or disease is another great example of why a designation would need to be changed. And then just good practical urban forestry. Something just doesn't make sense because it's too huge. And a classic example of that would be milpas. The ficus on milpas, they're fantastic. It's incredible what they've done, but it's pretty, you know, it's pretty logical to say that that's not probably the best spot for that species of tree, you know, now looking at it now. Next slide, please. So changes are typically generated by several different stakeholders. We have the general public. We do get requests from homeowners that live on a street to make a change to a designation. A lot of examples of that are when an existing designation just doesn't make practical sense for one reason or another. And during conversation with staff, it's noticed that this doesn't make sense, and they'll take it upon themselves to request that we review it and make a modification to the designation. Lots of requests from landscape architects also architects and developers. Again, the Mason project's a classic example of a progressive development changing the property significantly, and as a result of that, requesting that we update the street tree population that's being proposed for placement. Committee and commission members also, you have the ability to make recommendations for staff and review for existing designations. I think a good example of that, and something that does happen quite a bit with us at the Street Tree Advisory Committee level, is looking at tree removal requests, specifically street tree removal requests. And we as part of that review, we're always providing the information on what the existing designated species is for the street. And sometimes during review of individual trees, it's noticed that the designation is, an XYZ or whatever, and it just doesn't make practical sense. And as a result of that, a committee member will request that at some point moving forward, we agendize it and take a real critical look at what's currently designated and make a new recommendation, or at least to diversify the existing designation so that we have a little bit more flexibility in what's being used. And I think a lot of these are directed from staff. A good example would be Chino Street recently. A couple years ago, it was actually August 26th of 2020, so not too long ago. We brought a request to modify the designation on Chino from the 1000 to 1900 block. If you're familiar with Chino Street, it's got a ton of gigantic red flowering gum, which used to be a eucalyptus. We can still consider it eucalyptus, and they're gorgeous and people love them, but they just get way too big for the parkway over there. We applaud their efforts. The ones that are there have done remarkable. They're a pretty problematic tree for us. They're high maintenance requirement, as well as pretty challenging with like loss of limb failure. And then again, continual disruption of hardscape. So we reviewed it at the staff and Street Tree Advisory Committee level, and then we brought it to the commission for review and made a co-designation and changed it to African tulip tree and desert willow. And those are two trees that are much more suited for the parkway size. Also, trees that we would refer to as utility friendly. There's lots of utility lines that run down Chino, so it gives us a lot of flexibility to plant trees and minimize hardscape disruption and maximize canopy on the street, and also, minimize the overhead conflict with utility lines. Next slide, please. And so just to kind of recap the process, we kind of touched on it. We receive requests, typically in some written format, from whomever it is, some of the stakeholders we mentioned. And then staff prepares the agenda for the Street Tree Advisory Committee, and we review that. Typical reviews consist of field visits, discussion. During that discussion, we're looking at this existing species composition on street, what's currently used, what's working, what's not working, and looking at, progressive changes moving forward. How do we maximize the tree canopy, increase diversity, maybe add a new tree that gives us flexibility in smaller planting locations so that we can, again, increase our tree count per street. And then after review, they make a recommendation to the commission. Next slide, please. And so these Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendations, similar to the street tree removal considerations, are brought forward to the commission for review. If the commission approves, then the designation listing is updated. The Department Forestry Program manages this list, documents the date, and also lists the rationale for change. Next slide. So as part of this report, and I think, next steps moving forward, there's going to be an increased effort on from staff's perspective to really kind of drill down, look at the full designation listing, and try to make really good informed changes. And a bulk of that focus is going to be on pest and disease related issues, performance related issues, spatial considerations. And by that, I just mean, just simply matching the right tree for the location. I think that as we continue to see development, especially in the downtown corridor with zero setback and zero sort of lot line type things, we're gonna have to get really creative about the species that we're choosing so that we're not in constant conflict with structure while still being able to provide some element of tree canopy on the street. And then just the comprehensive maintenance concerns and problematic species. I think you will see over the next, year or two that there will be an increased effort to try to phase out things like palm trees that are designated in residential areas that are really difficult for us to maintain. The elimination of trees that just simply are too large for the space, or other trees that we know just simply don't perform anymore, given the change in the climate and obviously the increased reduction or decreased amount of annual precipitation. And then I think it's just important to note that even if a request is made for species change, that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be changed. We could go through the review process and make the determination that what's currently designated makes good practical sense, and there's absolutely no reason to change it. Next slide, please. And so moving forward, staff will continue to bring forward these recommendations to both the Street Tree Advisory Committee for review and then to the commission. These changes will be retained as part of public record and also will serve as historical information for future decision makers. We've always kept some form of record, but I think staff's going to make a concerted effort to really kind of increase that rationale for why things were changed so that future decision makers can look back and see why something was changed, and it can provide some good insight into why something was changed that, in 2023 and maybe it's 2043 and you're like, why did they ever do this? And they could actually go back and look at it and find out that in 2023 it made sense to change it from what it currently was because that didn't make sense, from 1977 or whatever. But it's just really good information, I think, both for the just general public and also, potential future decision makers down the road. Next slide. And so lastly, the one of the key missing components of this list is it's always existed, and lots of people know it does exist, but I think the majority of the public also don't realize that it exists. And it really is one of the most significant tools that the forestry program utilizes for just our comprehensive urban forestry program. And there have, even in my short time here, there's been numerous requests to try to make this a public resource. So I'm really pleased to announce that we've done that. And I want to give a huge shout out to Summers Case, the marketing coordinator, because she's been a complete rock star in getting this online for us. So now it's online. It's actually, she's made improvements since we put it online. So now it's even more dynamic. And we have some really good ideas moving forward to make it even more interactive and just fun for the end user. Next slide. Actually, just in reference, there's the URL if you're interested. You can find it on the City of Santa Barbara Urban Forestry webpage. And this is an old screenshot. This was the listing all packaged up and pretty online. But as I said, it's now gotten better. So there's a more dynamic Microsoft Excel workbook online as well. So it's free to access for the general public and gives you the ability to kind of sort and look at it on a little deeper level. So we're super excited about that and want to thank Summers again for her great efforts assisting us in getting this online. Next slide, please. And that's essentially it. We just wanted to kind of, take a few moments and explain the designation process. I think we're anxious to get going and make some changes. I think that the environment, and just the climate, to put it simply, is driving the need for several changes in the designation listing. And we'll be really happy to start bringing some stuff forward for review in the future. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slack. Anybody have any questions or discussion?
Okay. I just had a quick question. When you're when something comes forward for like a change in designation, whether it be staff initiated or a committee initiated, do you notice the whole neighborhood so they can come to meetings and have a say?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, historically, we've not gone to the step of trying to notice the whole neighborhood. It's something that we could look at. I think it's, there certainly is the community forestry component where it would be nice to be involved in that process. Some of the hardships, I think, in doing that is some of the turnaround times for us in terms of trying to, maybe get trees planted. So for example, we were in, fiscal year 21, we're trying to plant trees this year. We identified an area and we find out that something doesn't make sense, but we really still would like to try to realize that goal of planting these trees in that neighborhood. It allows us to sort of expedite the process by not having like a comprehensive neighborhood discussion. And I think that there's some importance in just the agency of the tree folks making really good informed decisions about what makes practical sense. And we want to try to increase diversity, but we also want to keep it at a relatively narrow number of selections on a given street or street segment, to not make it a little too difficult for us in terms of maintenance and just general urban forestry practice.
Thank you.
Ms. Longstreet.
I just have a comment. I mean, I think our city has a long-standing tradition in protecting the trees. And when you look at things like the Urban Forest Management Plan and the time and the thought that has gone into these documents and the care and the planning of our trees, I think it says a lot about Santa Barbara and the importance of what we're doing. Sometimes it seems like it's the same thing over and over again, but it really is a protection step in our urban forest. And it's getting more important every year.
Yeah. I guess, whenever people I know come through Santa Barbara, one of the comments I hear over and over again is one of the things that distinguishes Santa Barbara from so much of Southern California, Southern Central California is just this feeling of lush greenery as you go through the city. I mean, it just has a different feel to it, and it's very much due to the canopy that's present. I would like to say thank you for the website. I mean, I certainly have heard so many questions about that in my own tenure here. I think that's just a great build. And in the spirit of adding more work for you guys, I think some summary of the philosophy and practice of the management plan with the website publicized would be a great thing, whether it shows up in your water bill or in city news or on the WaterWise page. I think going out public with this would be a great thing to do, because I do get a lot of questions about it.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that. That was one of my next kind of a question I had, was just kind of the rollout of information. Because I'll be honest, before I joined the Santa Barbara Parks and Rec Commission, I didn't even know anything about an urban forest or what it was. I just was like, oh, there's trees. Like, I had no idea that there was like a tree commission and advisory, and there was like levels of protection for the trees, which now being involved, I think is really amazing and wonderful. But I don't think most people aren't really aware of that. And even for me, like knowing nothing really about trees other than just simply enjoying them, I don't know if it makes sense, or an idea of just like even like urban forest 101 for like the community, if that's something that people are interested in, or something that we could maybe share with like kids in school or like something like that. I don't know. as it is like so important. And I honestly had no idea until I joined the commission. So I think this was awesome, and I think it's worth sharing as widely as we could so people understand the value.
Yeah, Chair McGill and Commissioner Feck, yeah, those are great suggestions. I think we could always do more outreach. We do live in a very pro-tree community. We're pretty fortunate that a lot of people do understand that we exist and that the trees are there as a result of, thoughtful decisions, and they don't just magically appear. And we do some outreach with the youth. We do Arbor Day every year, where one of the forestry staff will give a talk, about the importance of trees and things of that nature, and try to do as much outreach as we can. But we can certainly do more. And I think that's not true, or that's true of not just street trees, but also of the setback trees. And I think continuing to educate the general population about the importance of the trees and the need to protect them and preserve them, and also to continue to promote the planting of the trees, to be able to say in 50 years, that the Santa Barbara still, that takeaway from everybody that visits the community is the trees, because it's I think it gets lost on a lot of people, but when you leave Santa Barbara, one of the most profound things about visiting it, as Chair McGill said, is the trees, and we want to continue these efforts and the historical legacy that's been in place, and make sure that the same is felt, 100 years from now, essentially.
Yeah, and I mean, just to one up further build, I think public outreach will also go a long ways, or could go a long ways, in helping put kind of the regulatory bureaucracy in context, because there's a lot of people that only see trees in terms of, I got to go through this ridiculous process of it, just for a tree that's in my front yard. And I think the context and the overarching philosophy and benefits as part of an outreach, it could be helpful.
Yeah, Chair McGill and Commissioners, that's 100% accurate. I think you will see these efforts ramp up. The city has a very lofty goal of being climate or carbon neutral in a very short period of time. And certainly trees are a huge part of that strategy. And there will be, I think, significant outreach efforts as we continue to move forward, to try to get the general public to understand the significant environmental benefits that urban trees provide to the community.
Thank you. I do have one question, and it's really around the role of native trees in the street tree plan. And there's, historically, Santa Barbara has been all about biodiversity and a broad range of species and things here that you wouldn't necessarily see elsewhere and aren't necessarily native, whereas the natives create habitat, and they create a broader habitat for more than just the trees. How do you balance that going forward?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, I think when we, some of the components that we talked about in terms of just good urban forestry practices, to try to not get too reliant on, a certain species of tree or a genus or a family. Anybody that knows Santa Barbara history, there weren't tons of trees, especially, in the flatlands or, in the sort of downtown area 2 centuries ago. And when you look at native trees, you essentially have coast live oak, bay, and there's a couple other smaller trees. So we have, 4 or 5. There's California sycamore is another one. We have a very limited toolbox to select from in terms of native tree planting. And native trees certainly have their place, and they're more adapted to the environment, and they can provide significantly more wildlife habitat, because all of the birds and the insects are used to living in these species of trees. But I think when we look at this urban built, human created environment, we're going to have to use all kinds of trees. And I think the more diversity that we introduce within the city's urban forest creates a more sustainable environment that allows us to deal with continually changing climate and lack of rainfall. And I think we're just going to have to become really flexible in our selections. You know, I think we're going to see the continued use of things like Palo Verde and even mesquite, these things that you see on your way to, you know, Palm Springs, that have traditionally been used because it never rains there and it's super hot and it's super dry. And these trees are adapted to that type of environment. You know, we have the invasive shot hole borer in town now that affects California sycamores. We are looking at potentially losing a significant number of native trees. And as a result of that pest being in town, all throughout Southern California, essentially, in terms of the native California sycamore, the native arroyo willow population. So I think the paradigm, we're just going to have to shift, and all trees are going to have to be accepted on some level, if that makes sense, in order for us to continue to have an urban canopy and something that's resilient and can withstand this constant influx of pests and disease that's coming overseas and shipping crates, and then the constant challenge of the climate becoming harsher and harsher and just water becoming more and more scarce. So I think natives are great, and we want to continue to utilize them, especially in places like Honda Valley and Hale Park and these open space areas. But in terms of just the general tree population, I think keeping that really rich diversity makes it much more sustainable for us. And we can't get too reliant upon just native trees for the street tree population.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, if not, I just want to say thank you very much for a comprehensive report, and really enjoyed reading and hearing about it.
Thank you.
And I believe that brings us to our final item, which is the Parks and the appointment to the De La Guerra Plaza Revitalization Design Advisory Committee. And this is an appointment to replace Roger Perry, who was on the committee along with BB Longstreet. And I guess before we go ahead, and I believe, and I'm just going on past practice, that the practice is that we'll go look for expressions of interest, and then based on what happened last time, I think ultimately it's my decision as chair. Is that correct?
Is there a consistency on their meetings, like what day and time, or does it vary?
I guess, yeah, I was just going to ask that same question. I was just going to turn over to Commissioner Longstreet. I had just that question, the day and time. And then also, where are you all in the process? Because from the meeting I sat in on it, I got the impression that the heavy lifting is done.
I would say that is true. Fingers crossed, that is true. We've gone through a lot of work to come up with a design, but that design is simply a submittal to HLC, which will, they will tweak it to meet standards that they will hold it to. We had been meeting on Fridays. Our last meeting was on a Monday morning, but we had been meeting Fridays.
In the morning?
Not very frequently, honestly. I mean, we had a big lull. That the meeting you attended, Chair McGill, was the first one in several months because, we all gave our input, and then they went away and tweaked the design and did some outside work that needed to happen. So I see it now as supporting when it goes before HLC, the committee has been asked to attend and, you know, support the project and be able to articulate why we've come up with certain designs. And then it'll be representing it to council and moving it forward with any luck.
So it's sort of at an advocacy stage. Is that correct?
At this point, it's at an advocacy state. I would say that's true. And I'm sorry that I sound a little negative. I served on this committee 20 years ago. And you'll notice that De La Guerra Plaza looks the way it looks because nothing happened. So I would love to see this pushed through as quickly and as simply as possible, and that we have some revitalization in that area. It's, I think it's an embarrassment that it's in the condition it's in right now. So anyhow, that's my political statement, along with the fact that I don't think it's going to be a lot of time at this point.
And what meetings there have been basically like 9 o'clock in the morning kind of thing. Is that correct?
Right, 9 to 11. Because we have 2 city council people on, there's a lot of schedules to coordinate.
Okay.
And sometimes those schedules set the meetings for the rest of us.
Okay, thanks. So last time, I certainly am willing and interested in participating. I had expressed willingness and interest the first go around when Roger took that second slot. I think I was at one point an alternate, but I don't think that ever got formalized.
I would be nominating. I would be interested in nominating you to be the second representative with Commissioner Longstreet if that's how this process goes. I feel like you've been following it along and you're pretty well versed in where they're at. And I think you are able to articulate in front of City Council and advocate. I'd be interested in that if you were interested still.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly do the meeting times. So that was really, that's the middle of the workday for a lot of folks. So,
I'd be interested.
Where are you? Where are you, Commissioner Feck? Because you obviously were sounding interested.
I'm just interested in like those types of things, but I have work. I have stand-up meetings at 9 a.m. every day, so I'm definitely out. But I'm, you know, I think if you're interested, you should definitely do it.
Consensus.
You know, given that the heavy lifting is done and that it's advocacy and council meetings and things like that, which they know me well. Maybe that'd probably be the easiest way forward.
Yeah, and just like one question, not in regards to this, but as far as like replacements for Commissioner Perry, does that happen for 2022? Is that the cycle usually?
So I'm gonna. If somebody else wants to jump in, but I'm going in the process. I'm in the process right now. So with the 2 commissioners that have resigned, their vacancies went into the pool that's being filled right now. So there have been a number of applicants. When I last checked for Parks and Recreation Commission, and last night was the last of the 3 interview sessions. So all the applicants have been interviewed now, and I think there were 8 or 9 last I checked. And Jasmine, you probably know it's either December 3rd or 7th that the appointments are made, and then the new commissioners would start with us or wherever. I'm up for reappointment too, so I interviewed as well. So 3 existing and/or new commissioners will be starting up in January. And is it December 3rd or what's the date? I can't remember. Do you?
I'm going to ask Rose, do you happen to have that on the tip of your tongue? Because I don't.
It's one of the 2. It's right there at the beginning of December.
When they're appointed?
Yeah.
They're the 7th, I believe that is.
Okay, that's what I kind of thought. Anyways, that's the basic.
Okay.
So it's just the process you went through with more vacancies than we thought we were going to have.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
So, yeah, so
So I
we-
guess I will take the second slot. Okay. Thanks. And I think that is it. So if there is no other new business, we can adjourn. And our next meeting will be on Wednesday, December 15th. Again, it's the holiday. We meet a week earlier.
Have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Be
You guys
safe.
have chest pain while you eat your turkey. Come see me. I'll be